Everybody, it's Anthony Brogdon, Strong Inspirations, where you get it straight, no chaser. I let the people do the talking and just try to ask a couple of intelligent questions. Maybe they're intelligent, but it helps me understand because they got a wealth of knowledge, the people that come on this channel. It's incredible that these are experts, award-winning folk, PhD and otherwise, that come on the channel, like my guest today. I'm telling you, my friends, she gonna light your mind up. She gonna put it on you like, whoa, I did not know that. Watch out. And so I guess I said, I'm Anthony Brogdon. You had Strong Inspirations. And here we are again. Hit the subscribe button on the channel, because just tell me you subscribe. It don't cost nothing. It don't do nothing. It just let me know you like me, because I like you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Hit the like button on this video, because I'm telling you, you're going to like it. So just go ahead. Hit the notifications bell so that you know when the new videos come up. And man, I'm putting 4 or 5 of them up a week. I just don't want to get caught up into a specific day and time. When it flows, it could be in the morning, at night, but when it hits my heart, I got to share some knowledge through the people that I have on the channel. I want to do it. Watch out there. Did you see the video of the guy who went to the KKK rally, black guy, and got caught? Wow. Was getting beat mercilessly? God stepped in, saved his life. He was so hyped up that the next day he went to the KKK rally and told them, and how about this? And he went in a convertible so that they know it was him, with bandages over his head and body. Watch that video. Did you see the one, and I got all kind of videos up here. Did you see the one where the lady talks about the Clinton massacre? Have you heard of that one? 300 some odd people were shot and they just standing there, but they didn't want them to learn how to vote. Watch that video. Did you see the one where the lady is out of Australia? And Australia was a black continent initially? Oh, really? I didn't know that. She explains it. She even says, and I had to laugh at it when she said it. She said, when I grew up in the bush. We used to walk around naked. Oh my God. Watch that video. How about the one where the lady is at the archives at Temple University? A black guy who said, hey man, I just like Black history, and they started collecting books and stuff like that. Collected so many that he donated and started one of the world's largest Black history collections. Willed it all to the university. Watch that video. How about lastly, the one where the lady says that there was a slave ship coming out of Africa. It was called an Amistad. The slave people got and found a way to break free from up under the hull or whatever. They killed a lot of them on the boat. They said, we ain't gonna, y'all was gonna kill us, so here we go. And they got tricked and came to America. This lady works at a museum, or it's a research center, in the name of the Amistad. Watch that video. It's one of the largest in the world, down in New Orleans. Watch that video. Oh man, you're gonna love what the lady on today. She's smiling. She got books behind her. This sister serious. She's sharing this with you. She coming on the channel. Oh, I ain't playing with you, my friends. How about this? And watch my movie. I got my own movie out, Business in the Black, The Rise of Black Business in America. I'm telling you, I talk about slaves who went to college, and I name names. Slaves who owned businesses and bought their freedom. I name names. I name names of slaves, or not slaves, but black folks back in during slavery. Some of them would be a millionaire. And this is before Madam C.J. Walker. All right, watch my movie. It's streaming on Amazon. And then I have the book that I wrote called Black Business Book. It's similar to the movie, but I tell you, I got even more information than this. It's over 200 facts. The last fact in the book, hey, and y'all know I'm from Detroit, I give a shout out to my man, Berry Gordy in Motown, because in '59, he started a phenomenon that's still going strong. I still danced, I heard it through the grapevine. You know what I mean, everybody? That's in my book. I got all these facts. Get you a copy. Come on, let's do it today. The book is very reasonably priced. You can get a few of them because you got enough money, everybody. Get a few of the books. Now, a couple more things. You know I'm having my own Black History Festival, right? Yeah, me. I'm coordinating this. I'm producing it. I'm hosting it. And I got people that are helping me. And that it's going to be in Kansas City, Kansas. It's Memorial Day weekend, and I titled it Freedom Quindaro. I want y'all to join me. I can only take 1,000 of you, though. I'll be honest. I got to, because I want it to be well organized. I want when you to get there to somebody tell you where you're going, what's going on. You're comfortable to get in the hotel real nice and everything. Know where you go, because once you get there Friday night, we got a party jam in a barn. And wear your dusty blue jeans. Don't come dressed up. Mm-hmm. We're going to sit on some hay and fish fry. So check me out. Come join me. It's called Freedom Quindaro. That is also on my website. And the website is businessintheblack.net. Now, you hear me use this term strong a lot. And I'm going to keep saying it because it's my favorite term. Strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And Grace, which is the introduction to my guest today. She's a strong sister. Let me tell you something. She might not be able to hear me, but she corrected me. I misspelled her name. I put an A instead of an E. And she said, no, don't do that. It ain't got no E right after the H, or no A after the H is a E. Y'all get it. She's serious. See that? I loved it too. I like it when women talk mean to me. Got no problem with it. And she educated too. Come on now. Introduce yourself. Thank you for coming on Strong Inspirations.
Hi, so my name is Dr. Hettie B. Williams, and I am currently an associate professor of African American history at Monmouth University, which is located on the Jersey Shore and town of West Long Branch, New Jersey. And my research and teaching has to do with the African American experience, and particularly Black women in the civil rights movement.
All right, hold on. Before you go there, I gotta do this. Hope you don't mind. I gotta ask a couple questions about yourself. Where sure. You originally from?
So I'm originally from New Jersey, central New Jersey, where I currently live now.
Okay. Did you get all A's in grade school?
I tried to.
I know you did. You was on honor roll?
Yes.
You did good in high school?
Yes.
Is there a high school in your town that is a high school for exceptional students, or is it integrated schools, that kind of thing?
Well, so my high school was a Mattawan Regional High School. So actually it drew on students from across the region as opposed to just in one town. So okay. Students from several towns came to the high school that I went to, and they had specialized programs there.
Okay.
And they were known for.
Is Black and white students?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How about the neighborhood you grew up? Did you grow in a Black neighborhood?
The neighborhood that I grew up in was an interracial neighborhood.
Okay. Is there now what big city are you near where you grew up?
So I grew up in the Mattawan Aberdeen area, and it's only about 30 minutes from New York.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, it's like considered a suburb, the Mattawan Aberdeen area.
Is that I mean, but is that that's Jersey, so that ain't East Orange and Orange?
No. So they were about 20 minutes from Mattawan Aberdeen.
Okay. Do you know how your family where the plantation is in your family?
So my parents were, so my dad was from Alabama and my mom is from Georgia. And so my mom came up, my parents got married. My mom relocated to New Jersey. And interestingly enough, she would tell us about when she was a teenager and younger that she was still working. She had to work in the cotton fields
Oh,
when she was
really?
younger. Yeah. So when you think about the American South and the type of labor that African Americans did through, the mid 20th century, it wasn't dissimilar
Yeah.
to
Oh, for
what.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she, when you say she worked in that she worked in as if she picked cotton.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got a few people on the channel that talk about it, and each one of them say they wasn't no good at it. They wasn't fast, and it just did not work for them.
Yeah, she would talk about, because my mom loved to have her nails done a certain way, and
Yeah,
like what it would do to your fingers, when you're working
yeah,
in that
exactly.
cotton field.
Now, what about on your dad's side?
The same thing. So my dad, he would tell us stories about the fact that he used to work. He went to work when he was about 5 years old. His family, they were migrant workers. And so they would follow the season and move from place to place. And he was working at age 5 in Alabama, starting in Alabama, and then Florida. And then eventually they came up to New Jersey. They actually ran out of money because they were migrant workers. So they went wherever they could get work.
Yeah.
And they couldn't return to Alabama one year, and they ended up staying in New Jersey. And that's the story he told us.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love it, but you're saying he couldn't return because some of it is, I know with the sharecropping is the guy would have his thumb on your neck. He would tell you that, hey, you didn't pick enough, you owe me so much money, you can't leave. But I hear of so many instances where not so many, but I hear of instances where the person did leave. I suspect sometimes the guy got mad and went looking for him almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think definitely coming to settle in the northern states. I mean, the North had its own segregation. So
yeah, it did.
So it wasn't as if they were running away completely from oppression.
Yeah.
Racism is everywhere.
Yeah, there's no question. So now, for yourself, where's your connection to love and the love for Black history like you have?
So my parents, they made sure that we made sure that we understood who we are as a people. And I remember my dad would read to us as a sibling. I have several siblings, but he would read to us from the encyclopedia about great Black heroes. And he would make sure that we knew the names of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and the great feats of African Americans. And so he was doing this as long as I could remember as a child, just letting us know that we are from a people who did great things.
Yeah.
So my parents really loved, history.
Well, it's good that you, the way you just alluded, great things. But, a lot of times there's so much of when we talk about Black history, it doesn't have a good, pretty picture. And even I'm sure we can find the good in every one of those stories. But when we hear about it, it's and even today, I think we still talk about it in negative terms. What's so wrong with us? What windows and fights that we've always had to go through. And I know I'm soapboxing a little bit, but when he found those good stories, and that's what you want to focus on even now, right?
Yes.
With that said, civil rights, what's a good story of civil rights?
So my work, I particularly look at the Black women in New Jersey and the role that they played. Most of our understanding of the civil rights movement does focus on the American South, and rightly so, in terms of the conditions that African Americans were in before the civil rights movement. But I particularly look at women like Marion Thompson Wright, who was the first Black woman to earn her PhD in history in the United States from a U.S. college. And she played a role behind the scenes many
Okay, hold on.
times.
What year is this? Is she getting this degree and stuff?
So she went to Columbia University, and this was in the 1940s. And she ended up researching segregation in the school system. And she wrote her dissertation. Columbia University published it in 1947. And she was investigating segregation, and she found out that there was segregation happening in the school systems in New Jersey, and looking at patterns between the North and the South, finding that New Jersey was still segregating students in the as late as the 1940s, mid 1940s. And so she actually exposed the fact that what would happen in the state of New Jersey is New Jersey schools, there was a law in place as early as in the 1880s that said that schools could not be segregated, but this was happening anyway. In Trenton, New Jersey, for instance, the school systems would be segregated. They would have a black school for the black kids and a white school for the white kids.
And that's not just because of neighborhood.
Right. No, it was the African-American students would actually be living closer to the quote unquote white school and still be sent over to other schools.
Yeah.
Or they would segregate them within the school, such as the case in Asbury Park. Asbury Park would separate the students within the school.
Within the same school.
In the same school. They wouldn't allow them to be in the same classes, for instance. Trenton would separate them between schools. And so
when she did her dissertation on it in the 40s, the Brown versus Board of Education, that's in 54, right?
Right. And so that's where I argue that it's her work of doing this historical research. These two parents in 1944, Hedgepeth and Williams, their names were Gladys Hedgepeth, was one of the mothers who went to the NAACP in New Jersey and said, can you help us? They're making my students, my kids go to this school that's far away from our house. And they're only making him go there because he's Black. And I want my kids to go to the school that's near the house that's been, designated for the white students. So Robert Queen was an NAACP lawyer in Trenton who took the case up to the New Jersey Supreme Court. New Jersey Supreme Court ruled that it is illegal, that segregation in the school system is illegal and it must end. So this case actually becomes the basis for the Brown case later, where Thurgood Marshall was able to say, this is a precedent-setting case in the nation involving the segregation of Black students in a northern state. Now, we usually think about the southern states and the segregation that was happening there, but it was happening throughout the North in states like New York and New Jersey. And this is the first precedent-setting case at the state level, pre-Brown.
Okay.
And so this is where I argue that we have to say that the civil rights movement was happening everywhere, like in northern states like New Jersey.
Yeah. Now, the civil rights, when we talk about the civil rights movement, there's got to be a different dichotomy between the severity of it, and this is a question of, and I'm gonna go with that, the severity of it in the North compared to the South. Is that the case, so to speak?
Right. So this is why I credit a lot of scholars who have been doing the work on the southern states and the violence that came with, trying to vote or go into a school that was segregated. The level of violence against African Americans in the South. Historians make a distinction between de facto and de jure segregation. So segregation that is happening despite laws saying that you can't separate students in the school is actually segregation, in fact, despite the laws. So that's what was happening in the North. In the South, you have ordinances and laws on the books that say the races must be separate. And so there are differences between the ways in which segregation unfolded in terms of the level of violence that was used, the laws that were on the books. But in the North, nonetheless, you still had segregation happening despite the laws. So the tenacity of racism is profound.
When we talk about fighting for civil rights, there's, I guess, maybe necessarily a couple fronts. There's the legal fight in court, there's the protest, and then and the protest is just making an announcement, but then there's a deeper protest when we're not going to do it anymore. We're not going to support this effort. Are those the three levels, or is there some other fights that, maybe I didn't think of?
So yeah, sometimes civil rights activists in the 60s would talk about what's called the triple front, where it's got to be an economic fight. There is a fight at the social level, but also the cultural level, dealing with representation. And that all three have to come together in order to advance Black freedom. And so we have to be concerned about laws and rights, equal access to jobs, but also, cultural representation, negative stereotypes that are circulating in mass media. So there are many fronts, I think, exactly as you said it perfectly, that there are many other fronts to kind of fight, to advance Black civil rights, more completely.
Let's tackle each one of them just a tad. When we talk about the fights that happen in court, is there some court cases similar to the Brown versus Board of Education that we lost? And then we had to come back at them in different ways. And it was like, man, we lost only because of racism or whatever?
Well, what do you think? One of the things that come out of the civil rights movement is affirmative action, which is coming before the courts again. It came before the courts several times between the late 60s and the present. Whether or not there are ways that the state could mitigate practices of segregation by developing a quota system, right? To say, well, you have no Black students at this college or at this school, you have to do something to ensure that in your admissions process that there's equal access, right? And so there's a series of cases. One man decided, the famous Bakke case in the early 70s, who stated that this is reverse discrimination because now, as a white person, I'm losing an opportunity to go to a particular school. And so you have this fight that is continuing over. There's a few cases before the Supreme Court now regarding whether or not race-based, factors can be used in admissions. So I think it's an ongoing struggle and fight in the court system.
What is it? What kind of civil rights is it that, and what is it called when we can't come and sit at the lunch counter when they had all those various sit-ins? What is that called?
Yeah, so public access. And so the same thing was happening in New Jersey too, where you couldn't, either, go into a certain store in a particular town or city, even though the law said you could. What the state of New Jersey did was it developed a new constitution in 1947 that explicitly said that people cannot be barred from public spaces based on race. So that was in 47. We finally get a federal law in the mid 60s. So this is like 20 years later.
Really?
And Civil Rights Act of 1964 gives equal access to public space and place.
Let's go back, and I know I'm jumping around and questions come at me this way. Okay, so slavery ends in 65, for all practical purposes. You get 7 years or so of the Reconstruction period. And then after that, specifically in the South, for lack of a better word, all hell breaks out in those Southern areas. Are there civil rights fights that go on during those times in the let's say the late 1800s? Are there civil rights battles? Do people file court cases given the fear of even doing the cases and things of that sort?
Yeah, well, the most famous of all is the Plessy versus Ferguson case in
Right.
1896. So, but we know there are examples.
What's the status? What was that case? Can you explain it?
So the Plessy versus Ferguson case is a case wherein Homer Plessy, he had a very light skin. He was actually multiracial, but at the time, the one drop rule. Basically, if you had one drop of black blood, you were considered black. So people in the town knew, right, of his ancestry, but he sought to challenge the segregation laws on the rail cars and explicitly went and purposely sat in the white section so that he could be arrested, because he believed that if the case did go to the Supreme Court, that he would win that case. But it turns out that
he would win because he might be saying, I ain't black, I'm white, and you can't do me, and I look like the rest of these white people up here.
Well, there's a big debate about that. But before Plessy does this, there are African American women in particular, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth. These are people with, dark skin complexions who are sitting down on rail cars and stagecoaches and who are basically engaged in a type of sit-in. So that we think about Plessy's case, but we rarely talk about the fact that Black women are doing the same thing before that case in 1896, and certainly before Rosa Parks.
Let me ask you this. How about this one? When they are doing this and they get arrested, they got to have the bail money, they have to go to court, or do they just kind of said, okay, don't talk about it no more, we let you go? It has to be judged upon, doesn't it?
Right. So at that time, so in the 1890s, you don't have really major national civil rights groups until the National Association of Colored Women is created. And you have women who are fighting, the segregation on the rail cars and the stagecoaches and so forth. And they create that organization as the first major civil rights organization. They are interested in legal cases and giving their money to legal causes, fighting against lynching. And you do get, by 1909, the creation of the NAACP and their legal defense fund, where they had money set aside and lawyers who would go into court and defend people who got arrested, for sitting in or going into public spaces that were segregated.
So it was those battles that someone chose as a group or as an individual that has really begun to move the needle.
Right. So you have individuals who decide, hey, I'm not sitting in that section because that section is not as well kept as the white section. So I'm just not going to take it. Mary Church Terrell did this, right? And as I said, several individuals besides Homer Plessy. And but as you begin to see these associations that get created, they actually lend their money to these cases over time that eventually culminate in 1954.
When we talk about the civil rights, it's really just some group of people, the people in charge, that are employing these policies to make life worse, to separate us, to give us less opportunity, so on and so forth. What is their aim? What do you think their aim is? This is a good one here for you.
Yeah, so I think that if we go back to 1896, the claim by the people who are sort of against Homer Plessy, they're saying, well, we have to separate the races because there's going to be, it's because of the police powers of the state. There are going to be riots and there's going to be fights that break out between the two racial groups because there's tension between the races. So we have to separate them to try and avoid, these tensions. So that's what gets used, the police powers of the state. But
Really?
I think that um, race is everywhere in our society, racism, from the founding of the republic down to the present. So it's deeply implicated in media, in our social interactions, in representation, in the friendships that we have, for instance. And that's a carryover from racial enslavement.
Yeah.
So, you characterize slavery as ending in 1865, and I would go a little further and say it doesn't end in
Yeah. Right.
1865 because Black people get re-enslaved in
Yeah.
the penal system.
Yeah. I got
And
you.
yeah, so
Yeah.
Douglas Blackman's book, Slavery by Another Name,
Yeah.
documents how Black people were kept in slavery for an additional 80 years. And Ava DuVernay has explored this in her documentary called The 13th. The 13th Amendment actually allows people to be enslaved through the criminal justice system. So,
When we talk about the fight for civil rights, some of the civil rights has hurt us to some extent. And what I mean by that is, then part of that civil rights fight was the integration, which now you see what I'm saying, and a lot of people will say integration hurt us. If they could have given us equal access, use of amount of monies that we spent in our community through tax dollars or what have you, we could have said, hey, we can stay okay in our own neighborhoods to some extent.
well, you got several examples in which Black people said that. I mean, look at
Okay.
Oklahoma. 21 Black towns were formed, and in the cases where we know the dollar circulated for significant amount of time, African Americans built up their separate communities, like in Tulsa, in Rosewood, Florida. Those towns were burned and bombed out, and
Right.
with the assistance of the government. So even in examples where Black people were thriving in their own towns and cities, those cities were bombed out, burned, and destroyed. So at the root of hate, at the root of racism is hate and fear, hate and fear of the other, and it's rooted in the founding of the republic.
Let me ask you this: we all over the place, but we getting there to the whole sum of it. It was the water different coming out of the Black fountain than the white fountain? Was it known that they let it rust a little bit more, or it was just a sight game to say our fountain is better? Do you think?
Well, I think if when you look at some of these images and photos, this whole idea of separate but equal was a ruse. It was never the case that, the facilities, the schools, the bathrooms were up to standard or par with the white facilities.
Yeah.
When you look at some of the images, you could see fountains, water fountains, for instance, that are filthy. And the sign above those water fountains say colored only. So I don't think it was ever the intent to make, these separate facilities equal to what whites had or enjoyed.
How about this? Is it some funny on this note? Okay, you make me sit in the back of the bus. It's 95 degrees outside, and I'm sitting in the back of the bus because that's where the engine is, and it's hotter in the back of the bus. When it gets cold in the winter, do they make me go to the front of the bus and you sit in the back? I'm trying to find it. Are there some instances that was really, really stupid of how they wanted to keep us separate, and it hurt them? They're like, oh man, we this ain't good for us. We still got to hold up to this policy.
Yeah, Nelson Mandela famously said, "Your fear has made you cruel and unjust." So the systems that were created, the unequal places and spaces, were about cruelty that flowed from fear. Your fear has made you cruel and unjust. And so these were conditions that I think flow forth from fear, and fear that you were taught as a child, don't go near those people. They're bad, they're inferior, or they're going to hurt you. And these ideas float around in the culture. So there's the culture. That's one front of us obtaining our freedom is representation, right? You don't see positive images of yourself, right? The other side is told, well, that's how those quote unquote people are, right? So I think that's rooted in fear. This injustice is rooted in fear.
Now, I'm staying on that same note, but isn't it kind of funny? They don't want us to party with them, but they come party with us. They used to hang out in Greenwood at the bars and the clubs all the time.
I mean, look at jazz music, same thing. It's a co-optation, appropriation, right? Toni Morrison's book gets at this, Playing in the Dark, right? I think that's essentially what you're saying.
Yeah.
Play, right?
Yeah.
Quote unquote, play in the dark. But there's a thief in the temple, as Prince said, thieves in the temple. You come in the temple to steal things and to appropriate and walk away. And so that's the cultural front. All the things that Black people have produced, they haven't always had complete control over because it gets co-opted or appropriated.
Let's go back to some more of the stories out of New Jersey that you write about. Tell us a couple more ladies or something like that have done some significant things.
So one of them is Sarah Spencer Washington, who was active in the 1930s and 40s. She came up from Virginia, first to Pennsylvania, and then eventually to Atlantic City, New Jersey. She builds a $1 million empire in hair care products called the Apex Company. She probably employed, 45,000 Apex agents around the world.
It's a Black lady doing this.
Right. African-American woman settles in Atlantic City. And she was a great philanthropist and businesswoman, probably operated one of the first Black-owned and operated factories by a woman in New Jersey by the 1920s. And she's a little known person who gave her support to civil rights causes. She's credited with integrating the housing in Atlantic City along the boardwalk, the beachfront property, when she purchased some property on the beachfront in Atlantic City. Marion Thompson Wright, as I mentioned, also active in that case in 1944 involving school segregation. There's Anna Arnold Hedgeman, who was active in New Jersey and New York. She plays a big role in securing the Federal Employment Practices Commission with A. Philip Randolph during World War II, 1945. So I look at these women as being active around the same time and advancing civil rights in New Jersey.
Is there an attorney that is kind of he or she is the go-to person to help with these cases that or other issues that happen out in the New Jersey area?
Yes, I would say Robert Queen. He was an NAACP lawyer. He's the guy that took the case in Trenton, but he was one of the go-to people, I think, in the 1940s. Other lawyers Black lawyers and lawyers in Asbury Park were sought out as well to help with different cases in that city and Toms River in the 1920s prior. And then Marion Thompson Wright, who's doing this research and uncovering all of this evidence that then gets used in the court system to argue for the integration of schools.
With these court cases, somebody's got to help pay the lawyer's salary. I know NAACP Legal Defense Fund, but were there other efforts that organizations that came along or something like that?
Yeah, there were local committees. Sometimes it was the parents who were a part of a local civil rights committee or club, or in other instances, they were actually members of the NAACP. But what the NAACP papers reveal is that sometimes the local NAACP chapters wrote to the national office and said, hey, we have these parents here. We think they have a serious case. Can you send us some support? And the NAACP in return would send either some legal support or some monetary support.
Okay.
And they would have fundraisers and drives to help also with if they had a specific case that they wanted to get through the courts. So there is a relationship between the local people and the national office.
When we talk about the politics from a federal level, who's the president that I guess helps move civil rights along the most? Let's go with that one.
Yeah, it's a complicated one. I think we look at Lyndon Johnson on the one hand helping with civil rights cases like the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but at the same time, the police are being militarized under Johnson, right? With all this funding is being funneled to the police, and the criminal justice system is beginning to incarcerate larger numbers of African Americans. So on the one hand, Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ in the 60s, was signing on to some of these civil rights and supporting it, right? But on the other hand, you see beginning to see the rise of mass incarceration of Black people. So you get the civil rights, but on the other hand, you're getting the mass incarceration,
yeah, I got you,
of Black men.
And he's when Lyndon, his terms are what? Right, quick, Johnson.
So his Great Society, he made civil rights a part of his larger Great Society platform to end poverty. His focus was ending poverty, but he also signed on to civil rights as a part of the larger, Great Society programs that he had. So he's complicated. He's a complicated person because under him also you get the Vietnam War. He escalates the involvement in Vietnam to war, and you get a large number of Black soldiers being drafted, to go fight in the war.
When we talk about who hurt us the most, is that Johnson right after Reconstruction and what he allowed to happen with Jim Crow?
All right, the Black Codes. I mean, I think he comes. I mean, you look at the list of worst presidents, Andrew Johnson kind of makes that list sometimes, because the Black Codes, I would argue, are kind of the basis for things like stop and frisk, right? That you see today, like in the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
You have these infractions where someone's committing a misdemeanor and they end up dead, right? And it's just like, well, you could have given this person a citation and say, hey, you have to come to court. But so, in the 19th century, that's what was happening with African Americans who were being put into these jails and sent to hard labor for petty infractions, and that has a history.
Okay, I got you. Well, now you've written a book over this?
So my book is set to come out soon on Black women in the civil rights movement.
Okay.
My first book was on the civil rights movement,
and you have a copy of that?
National level. Say again?
Do you have a copy of that, the first book, nearby?
Oh, yes.
Let me see it. Let's see it.
From We Shall Overcome to, well,
we got time. Let's see it.
Yeah.
What's the name of the book?
I don't know why. We Shall Overcome to We Shall Overrun.
Okay.
The collapse of the civil rights movement and the Black Power revolt. And I was talking about Black Power.
So what you're saying in that, what's the short version, the synopsis of that?
So it's just I talk about the conflict between the major civil rights organizations and how the Black Power movement emerged from the conflict between the major groups. And
I love it. So because that's one angle that I mentioned, the three angles of courts and protest, and then not support, but then the other was the let's say violent angle, and that's what you speak of in there, that also moves civil rights along.
Yeah, I mean, most scholars agree with that. I mean, Charles Cobb in his book talks about This nonviolent stuff will get you killed. In his book, he's basically arguing that they had different strategies and methods for different days. You know, they would have been killed had the Deacons for Defense, for instance, not protected the SNCC and Corps workers when they went south. You know, these Korean War veterans called the Deacons for Defense and Justice had guns and said, we're going to protect you. I found a case in 1947 in New Jersey where a man has a cross burned on his lawn and he calls the NAACP, and it's written in the New York Times in 1947 that the NAACP rides in with several cars of 27 men with guns. And these are members of the NAACP who came to defend this man's home. So you're right about that. It was all of these different strategies and methods to try to advance Black civil rights.
What is lastly, what was the celebration like, if you know, when Brown versus Board became when they voted for it? Is that a national celebration across America? What did people know that it happened? What was the temperature at that point?
So here's the thing, is very interesting, because between 54 and 57, what you had once that law passed, you had individual parents and children say, okay, we're going to test the law and see if we can, now that this law has been signed at the federal level, I'm going to take my daughter over to this school and have her enrolled. But guess what? It unfolds in Little Rock in 57 because the school said, we're not doing it. Southern school said, we're not going to do it. Segregation now, segregation forever. And it is a conflagration across the nation because the National Guard had to be called out, federalized by the president. So, and you could even argue that schools are becoming more segregated now. There's a court case right now in New Jersey where parents and civil rights group are suing, several school districts for segregation. That's happening right now. So there was a lot of resistance.
So at the end of the day, the law doesn't just make it automatically happen.
Right. That's my point about, looking at laws. That's the case in New Jersey. In 1944, the laws said this is against the law and was happening anyway.
Yeah, so. I'm sure. Well, is there a question that I have not asked you off the cuff?
That was a lot. We covered a lot of ground, man.
Yeah, I thought we did. And I know in the time, you know more than what you shared. So I tell everybody, and we'll talk later. I love people to come back on. But everybody, this is what I do. I find these people who know what they're talking about. You can't stump them with no questions. She got the answer. She know it. She good at it. She research it, then she teach it to other people. That's a beautiful thing. And your family, they've seen you get your doctorate and they proud of you and all that other stuff, aren't they? Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's a beautiful thing. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button on this video, hit the notifications bell, tell somebody about strong inspirations. Don't keep it to yourself. There's too much information here on this channel. We're over 280 some videos strong and growing. Like this video. And to you, my sister, I say this with all sincerity, and I mean this. I want you to stay strong, stay safe. You're making all of us proud. Mm-hmm. You really are. I mean that. You teaching people and putting it on them in their heart, their mind, and keep doing that. It's great that you've come to be where you are. And to pick the topic that you've picked, open our eyes. Because like you say, if you don't know your history, this thing can come back around on you. Mm-hmm. That's what we're talking about, this civil rights thing, because every time you allude to how it's going on today.
Yep.
It's black and white. It happened then, and they might even be reading it to say, let's try it again. They might have slept up on it or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it might be going that way. And now we got these historians saying, hold on now, we've seen this before. Everybody, here it come.
Yep.
Yeah, there it is. I'll say thank you for coming on the channel. We'll talk again.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Yes, bye-bye.